Okay, we are live.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the South Whidbey School Board of Education meeting. We're going to begin with our agenda, going over the agenda and minutes. Do I have a approval for the consent agenda and minutes as presented?
Move to approve.
A second?
Second.
Oh, I can't remove that. That's you guys. We're going to go on to number 2, Christy.
Okay, did you take a vote?
Oh, we did not. That's what happens when you're rushed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Motion's carried. Let's go to personnel report.
Actually, you can just do the consent agenda as a whole.
It's really difficult, Christy, if you could pull that up so I could see the whole thing.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Let me,
okay, now I see it. Yeah, no, pull it up a little further, please.
hold on a second. There we go.
No, there we go. Oh, yeah, okay. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, consent agenda is approved. So we are going to highly capable learning students. Dr. Mocha?
I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Bankhauser, who should be joining us as a panelist. I know we have that set up. And then Jeff is going to introduce his presenters.
Hey everybody, good evening. Thrilled to talk about our highly capable program. We have, a little over 60 students enrolled in our highly capable program at K through 12 levels. We have, starting last January, a year ago, we started a cohort model with our 3rd and 4th graders, our 5th and 6th graders, and our 7th and 8th graders. And each of those cohorts have between 8 and 10 students in them. And that's led by Tracy McKnight, who works in the program, and Karen Plouffe, who's the teacher of record for the program. Karen leads the 3-4 program at the North Campus. Tracy meets with the students at the 5-6 and the 7-8, and they collaborate together for programming. One of the things that's unique about highly capable learners is that they may qualify in some areas, and they have unique personalities, they have unique skills, and so our program is there to meet them individually and try to engage their unique learning styles. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and Karen, who have a presentation here that Christy is going to play for you.
Hi, my name is Tracy McKnight.
Oops. Sorry, Tracy. Let me know when you want me to play.
Tracy and Karen are there, right?
Yes, I'm here. You can go ahead and play.
Yes. Go ahead
You
and
want
play
to
it.
play it? Okay.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tracy McKnight, and I teach the Highly Capable Learners program for the 5th through 8th grade. Each group meets once a week on Wednesday for about an hour. At this age level, the HCL students choose a topic of interest of their choice and design a project that is personally significant and meaningful. We've had many creative projects over the years that have included writing books, poetry collections, learning to code, studying architecture, designing a homeless community, and legislative action to help the orcas. Students present a project proposal to their peers that outlines their goal and plan, as well as a timeline for completion. We often work as a team, brainstorm ideas together, and collaborate to help each other. They also meet with local experts to help guide their project. We've been fortunate to have many great volunteers from our communities, such as speakers from the Whidbey Homeless Coalition, Orca Network, Whidbey Life Magazine, and a visit to Taproot Architects. Here are just a few examples of the students' creative work.
So Tracy and Karen, if you want to kind of walk through your slideshow here and explain what we're seeing.
Okay,
These are some-
so Tracy, you want to go ahead and take over this part?
Sure. These are some examples of the students' work. This is a project that a 7th grade student did to build a model glider. It was a process of trial and error to measure weight, aerodynamics, and speed and integrity. You can, next slide.
Okay.
Whoa.
This was another project from a 7th grade student to create a logic gates program to run a 4-function calculator. So this is his circuit board that he did online. Go to the next slide. This is students writing a script for a play. It was set in a time period going back in history in different time periods, so they had to research time periods in history, and they wrote several acts to the play. And this is another group performing. This student wanted to create a Magic the Gathering game card. It's a popular card game. He learned a graphic design program and taught himself how to create that original artwork. And this card can actually function in the game. He wanted to make sure it was a real card and didn't just ruin everybody's game. So he did a lot of research on how to create something that would work within the game. And we've had several students who like writing books. This is just an example of one. She wrote a chicken a chapter. There were 16 chapters on chickens and a really creative story about different chickens that she owns. And she's presenting that to the class at the end of the semester. A lot of interest in coding from both groups, the 5th, 6th, and the 7th, 8th. These students learned to code. They did some Google computer science programs. And they wanted to learn to code in Python. We had an expert, actually Michael Maddox, who graduated last year from South Whidbey High School, came back over Christmas break and worked with the kids. He's did a computer science program at Washington State University. So he was our local expert, and they created this game. Here's some pictures of our trips out to meet with experts. We went to Taproot Architects. We've also had visitors from Whidbey Life magazine for 2 students who were creating a fashion magazine. So she came in and spoke with them on that. And we've had field trips. We went to Mopop in Seattle and did a STEAM workshop. We also interject some Lego robotics. Kids work on, and Destination Imagination STEM challenges, which are these instant challenges of building different creations. So we've got a few pictures of building with straws and trying to support weight. Another mousetrap design made from a mousetrap, CDs, and balsa wood, and then testing for distance and speed and trying to break. There's different competitions with records. So that's what that video was of. And then Karen.
Okay, so I'll take over, I guess, from here. If you could hit the little audio. All right, works for me. Okay, so this is a couple of different projects that kids did. To your left is a mini Sphero. The kids made a maze, and then they had to code it to run the maze that they built. The little car that you're seeing there is from Sam Labs, another form of coding. The kids had to construct their race track and then build a car and then learn how to steer it using the iPad as a steering wheel. We also found out, though, that you could steer it with facial expressions. The kids found that out, which was pretty cool. And also with voice volume, which was not my favorite. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, that's a little delayed. Oh, so this is the beginning of the roller coaster, which is massive. There's a little video of it towards the end, I believe. This was the start of it. The kids were trying to learn teamwork from it, and we had one student in particular who really took a liking to it. That would be Tracy's child, who finished the project. Pretty cool. All right, next slide. Oh, so this is another type of Lego robotics that the kids did, but I decided to make it a little more challenging, and I refused to give them directions on how to build something. I told them, do it yourself. So they did, and that's their little post. It says, we managed to make this the first day with no instructions. So not too much complaining, and then they jumped right into it. Right, next slide. This is continuation of, oh, this must be an older, of the Legos project. So it actually ends up about 3 times this size. Next slide. Smooth. No. So close! Okay, so obviously I get just as excited as the kids. So this was really hard for them to do, but they learned the whole thing all on their own. And rather than getting frustrated with me not helping them, they took on the challenge. And this kid in particular, he just was relentless, and he just kept persevering and persevering. And he was so close. We were both going bananas. So it's just as exciting for me when the kids get into it as it is for these guys. But the challenges that they're willing to take on, it's really fun to watch. And we basically do our work on the floor, on a tabletop, wherever the kids want to work. We have tables that turn into boards, and they build and construct the things that they're into. Some of them are actually using what's called voxels to build a video game, which is like the step before you would move on to your stuff that Tracy's doing with some of the older kids. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's a learning experience. Oh, and Tracy, sorry I didn't get the video of the final roller coaster up there. I must have put it on another slide. But it's cool.
So thank you both for presenting those very interesting projects. It's fascinating to me to see 3rd and 4th graders doing coding that is able to have robots move around on mazes. That's fantastic. We do in May usually do an identification process for highly capable learners. That has been delayed because of the current school closure. So what we're going to do is do the identification process and then do the assessments in September when we return. So those will be happening here in the next couple of weeks. And other than that, do you guys have any questions about the work that we're doing?
I don't have a question, Dr. Frankhauser, just for Karen and Tracy, thank you for the great work that you're doing. The board had the opportunity to go take a look at that Lego project a couple of months ago, and I was blown away by those kids that were in there that were creating that roller coaster. It was phenomenal, and it wasn't done, but it was just a spectacular piece of work for the kids. And you could tell that they put a lot of work into it and a lot of thought, and a great intellectual endeavor. So thank you both for doing that great work.
Yes. Well, we'll have to have you over for a couple more visits when the kids are really engaged, when they finally finish something, because it's like electric in the room when they've done something that they're so proud of. It's pretty cool to watch.
I'd love that. And it was electric that day. I mean, they were just brimming over with excitement. And there were just a few kids in there, but it was really, really fun to see what you'd done.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
If I can do a little shout out to Dr. Frankhauser on behalf of myself and the board. Recently, you had a special ed review, and nothing was out of compliance. And I don't know if the folks in the audience realize what a huge endeavor that is, because I know of no school district that has gotten that kind of recognition, because we're just simply not given enough resources for special education kids. And to have accomplished that and get that kind of recognition is awesome, Jeff. So thank you to you and the incredible staff that you work with to service the needs of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would like to say that I was thrilled, and of course, just as a testimony to the amazing staff that we do have working, not only in special education, but in general education, to provide these kind of inclusive learning environments for our students. So thank you.
Okay. Anybody else a comment for Karen and Tracy about HCL, besides a big shout out and a great applause? And sorry, it's less personal than we would like it to be, but it's heartfelt, and we appreciate what you're doing. We know the parents of these kids do as well, so it's notable.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else from the board?
No, just good job. I mean, it's amazing work. So great job to everyone.
Okay. I'm really having a tough time reading this agenda. I think we're on Memorandum 1920-44, approval of board resolution 650, emergency waiver of school days and instructional hours and continuous learning plan. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
Joe, I want to commend your team for the work that you guys have put into pulling that together, right on down to the daily schedules and how you guys are working to keep students engaged. It was very clearly articulated, and it obviously took a lot of time and effort and planning on leadership's part as well as building part as well.
Mhm. Thank you. This particular document is the waiver of days and instructional hours. Probably not a district in the state that won't be applying for this. The next item, thank you in advance, Andrea, is the continuous learning plan. This waiver that you're about to vote on is about making sure that we get our apportionment by applying for this waiver for hours and days, because as you know, the year is usually 180 days, which we basically did, but I'm not taking any chances, so I'm applying for the waiver. And 1,027 hours on average per student of teacher time, which we know we didn't meet. So that's what the waiver is about.
Did I misread it? We're approving the waiver and the continuous learning plan though, right?
Two separate items.
Two separate items.
Yeah. So let's call for the vote on the waiver. Any more discussion about the waiver, first of all? Okay.
Actually, they're all in the same memorandum, Memorandum 1920-44. It's both the approval of the waiver and the
I'm
continuous
sorry,
learning plan.
Andrea's right.
Yep.
I misread that.
So
Yes.
44 and 45 combined.
Yeah.
Well,
45 is the
Too. I misread it. I thought
WIAA.
there was two separate ones.
Yeah, the next one is about WIAA. I am so sorry. I
Okay.
misread it. Andrea was on the money.
All right, then before we vote, I do want to comment that I read that continuous learning plan. It's enormous. The document is obviously created with a great deal of thought and caring and great teacher input to have pulled that whole thing together. And what the South Whidbey teachers have done and the staff that are supporting them is just really remarkable. It's an outstanding document, and it does speak volumes to what we're trying to do. We're not perfect. Nobody's perfect, especially right now, but it's a really, really great work. So with that, any more
I
comments?
concur, Julie. Thank you and Andrea for those kind words, because it was overwhelming to read, and it was a good job.
I would like to particularly call out the teaching and support staff that has done such a fantastic job with shifting gears so completely from in-person learning to putting together this amazing plan and putting it into action. The trial and error that's involved, I know that it's a delicate, difficult balancing act between getting too much work for the parents who are unexpectedly at home and having to teach their children, while still providing enough for those who are gung-ho and really want to push forward as hard as possible. And I think that no balance is ever going to be perfect, but this is the team from the support staff and teaching staff through the administrators has done a fantastic job of putting together something that very nearly hits that balance. And it represents a lot of really hard and thoughtful work. So thank you.
I almost felt there, Brooke, like you were saying you wanted more PE time for your kid.
That wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, I concur, Brooke, and I think the detail of this plan draws to everyone's focus the amount of teacher input that it had to have created it.
Mhm.
It's just great work. Okay, any other comments?
I just want to say thank you to the board for recognizing that, because it took a lot of time and effort on everyone's part to turn the entire system on a dime. And we've got a long way to go before we get back to face-to-face. So this is our work to create a building block. So more to come.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion is carried, and thanks to everybody that worked on this document. It was truly good. Okay, memorandum, I lost it. It's the resolution for WIA. 1920-45 approval of WIA membership renewal school board resolution 651. You want to give us a little overview on what this is, Dr. Mocha, so our audience is enlightened about it too?
Absolutely. We do this on an annual basis. We are members in the WIAA, that's the Athletic Association. So activities and athletics, as I know, certainly Damien, who was our rep, and Charlie, who is now our rep, they are very familiar with this, and all of you know WIAA governs athletics in the state. So this is our annual adoption of membership.
Any comments from the, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I have a second.
Second.
Comments from the board? Nope. All those in favor?
I would say it's not just athletics, it's Washington Interscholastic Activities Association.
Mm-hmm.
So it encompasses even high, now I just,
Band and orchestra and all of our
Yeah.
clubs and other activities.
I was trying to think of the club though, that was the one that competes, the 5 students that compete, and I just.
You mean
we're
Knowledge
still-
Bowl?
Pardon?
Knowledge Bowl?
Knowledge Bowl, thank you. That's what I was. Yes, but yes, it's interscholastic activity, so it does encompass everything, not just athletics.
Good point. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. Public comments.
Do you want to handle those under superintendent's update as we usually
Sure.
do?
We can
Okay.
do that. You did say that. Okay. Financial enrollment report. Mr. Poolman.
Good evening. So we'll start the financial report for the month of April. Next. So we are 2/3 of the way through our fiscal year, 8 of the 12 months, so about 67% of the way. Our revenue is currently $14 million, almost $914,000, which represents about 71% of our budgeted revenue for the year. Just about where it's been for the last 2 years, same percentage-wise, though we are down a little bit in the dollar amount, and there's a reason for that. And it's basically the revenue by month where it's the levy collection. It's always going to be a little lower this year than it was in a previous year. Next. If you have questions, be sure and stop me as I go. Our expenditures are actually going to look pretty good. You know, one upside to a closure is there's some expenditures that we're probably not going to have. So if we look at our payroll costs, we are at about 64%, 67% of the way through the year. So it's right where it should be. Our non-employee costs are actually down from last year by about $185,000 year to date. They're about 1.8 million. So year to date, we spent $13,483,000. And you can see that the majority of that, as always, salaries and benefits for our staff. Next. This is with total encumbrances, so it starts giving you a bigger picture of where we may end up at the end of the year. Payroll is about 96.7% encumbered. And the thing about the closure is substitute costs, costs for field trips, athletic staff that are coaching, those type of things aren't going to be there. So I think we're going to save a little bit of money from budget in the payroll area. And also our MSOCs, our supplies, services, travel is also about 81%. So it's lower than we would anticipate currently. So our total encumbrance is about 94.3%. So I think we're going to hopefully stay below 96% of our budget in the expenditure side. So that'll be very helpful as we move into next year. Because as we talk about revenue later on, you'll see, you know, why we need that. Next. General fund, I'm giving you a couple different ways of looking at it. The first is the actual dollar amount, and you'll see it's the highest we've had in the last 4 years. But, you know, it's also a percentage of expenditures. And because expenditures have increased dramatically in the last few years, if you look at the bottom one, you'll see that even though it's substantially higher than any other year for the month of April, we're still within the range of where we've been. And actually, we've had a year where our fund balance was, as a percentage, was higher than it is today. Next. Budget status report, just a breakdown of where our revenue comes from. You see we have local taxes, which is our levy, and we collected half of that in last fall, a little bit in April, and the remainder will be in May, because the second half of the taxes are due on April 30th. The local support is money generated in our buildings. We're about 576,000 of our 608,000 there. And our state general purpose and special purpose, those are enrollment-based numbers. They are a percentage of the year, and then our federal funding. On the expenditure side of things, it's broken down by program. You can see our regular basic education, our special education, vocational program at the high school, and then the rest are basically grants. Other programs with support services being district-wide costs at the bottom. We're about 13,483,000. So we started the year with a fund balance of about 2.3 million. We're currently at about 3.7 million. That fund balance will decline as we move through the summer months because we do use fund balance to offset costs at that time. Next. And just the other funds, just a quick look at capital projects. We have about 1.3 million in there, 81,000 in debt service, though most of that will be spent on June 1st for a debt service payment. Transportation vehicle fund currently has about 214,000, though we are spending 150,000, which you approved this month for the purchase of the bus that showed up. And we have about 47,000 left in the student body fund. And that's one, as I mentioned before, we'll need to keep track of, because one is they're not generating any revenue this year because activities are not happening while we are reclosed, and don't know what the fall looks like. Next. And that's the financial report for April. So if we don't have any other questions, we can move on to the budget for next year. So July 22nd is when we will do our formal budget adoption, and there will be 2 adoptions on that night. The first is our 2021 budget, and then also a 4-year budget that goes along with. What we're going to talk about tonight is what's referred to as the F203. It's a revenue projections, and it's part of that budget presentation. So on the 22nd, we'll have the budget hearings, do a presentation, have the ability for the community to have input into the budget, and then hopefully have the budget adopted by the school board. As a second-class citizen, and that basically means we have less than 2,000 kids in our school district, we are required to have our budget to the ESD for review by August 1st. So we have to have it done by basically the end of July. We will have a budget presentation for the community on July, I believe the Wednesday is an 8th. We are required by July 10th to have one available for public review. Next. So, as I've probably said a million times, funding in this state is predominantly driven by student enrollment. It's the main factor in our state general purpose and our state special purpose funding. So basically basic ed, special education, lab, the major funding programs we have are all driven by the number of students that we have in the district. Next. So when we start getting ready to build a budget, we have to figure out what we believe the anticipated enrollment will be for the coming year. And I always start with where are we today? This is our actual enrollment for 2019-20, and you'll know we already have our May and June numbers in there because they are estimates based on last year. Since we're closed, we're not actually reporting enrollment, so OSPI just rolled it forward based on the same pattern as last year. So what it came down to is we have about 1,253 FTE, that's full-time equivalent students. Headcount is always higher than FTE, but we get funded on FTE. And if we look at the breakdown by grades, you can see that our largest class is our current sophomore class at about 116, and our smallest is our second grade class at about 74, and everybody else falls somewhere between those two numbers. Next. So to look at projecting enrollment, we have to look at our actual history, and this is the last 5 years, and you'll see that if we start on the left at 2015-16, we were at 1339, and then a slight decrease each year to get us at 1253, where we are today. You also see if you look at the change in prior year under the total that it's not always consistent. In 2015-16, we had 60 fewer FTE, then it was 19, 11, 40, 15. So there's not a real clean pattern when we start looking at enrollment and the changes we've had. Next. I also need to look at it by month because what we receive in funding is an average for the year. So it's a count between September to June. It's not where we start and not where we end. But if you look at the pattern, you always notice that we start higher and end lower in June. It's just one of those patterns that over time our enrollment declines, and it has every single year that I've been here for the last 15 years. It's a very standard school pattern for us. But there are some variations. The bottom line is this year, and you see that it looks a little different than some of the previous years. So I want to look at some of those patterns when we look at enrollment projections. Next. So there's several ways of trying to determine what our enrollment looks like next year. The first is a straight rollover model. We could take 80 kids in kindergarten and roll them to first grade and say there's 80 kids in first grade. We know that that's not an accurate model as we look at our enrollment numbers. It just doesn't happen that way. We can also do a straight cohort survival. Number of kids in second grade that moves to third grade. An example is we had 100 kids in second grade, we had 95 in third grade, we lost 5 kids. The survival rate is a 0.95. We can use that to try to figure out where we are in the future. The one I really like the most and I use the most is a weighted cohort survival. We do the same concept, except that we look at a period of years and we weight what happened last year more than the year before, which is greater than the year before, etc. So that the most current history is what we're working with and not what happened 5 years ago. Because if you go back and look at our enrollment, there might be a year, 2010, we lost 170 kids. Planned for it, knew it, but the next year we only may have lost 20 kids. So you want to kind of look at those patterns. Next. So this is an example of what I've used for this projection, and it's a 3-year weighted cohort model. So basically, if you go to 16-17 and you look at the second graders in 2016, how many moved into third grade in 2017, you see we lost a couple, so it's a 0.98 cohort survival. The following group of second graders started at 90, went up to 93, so it actually increased. So it's a 1.03 cohort. And the following year, it went from 80 to 85, or 1.06. You take those, you add the most weight to the most current year. So the 18-19 is worth 3 times as much as 16-17 divided out. You get an average of 1.04. If we had 75 students in second grade this year and we multiplied by 1.04, I would anticipate that we'd have 78 third graders next year. And this is a model that works fairly well. It's about the closest I can find that actually looks like what we're actually going to do. Next. And this gives you kind of a picture of what that looks like. So 3 years ago, it actually decreased. 2 years ago, it increased. Last year, it increased. So we would think that that 73.8 second grade this year becomes 76.4 because it increases by, you know, a 1 point something cohort model. And it's kind of the way we look at it. And you can do that for, you know, basically all grades and see how they increased. And what we find over time is that, you know, typically you'll see an increase from kindergarten to first grade. You'll see an increase from 8th grade to 9th grade as kids that may have been homeschooled or something, private school, come into the high school. And you always see a drop from the sophomore year to the junior year. And that's normally a result of running start. So it's some of those factors that we look at when we try to anticipate where we're going with the enrollment. Next. So if we use that model, we come up with 1,228 FTE. About 406 of those are in the K4 at the North Campus, another 27 and a half in the K6 South Woodby Academy program at the South Campus, about 180 at the South Campus in grades 5th and 6th, close to 197 in the 7th and 8th grade. The traditional high school program, about 399 in the 9th to 12th grade South Woodby Academy, about 30 students. So that gives us about 1,228. Next. We also have to do a 4-year projection. And I'll be the first to say that once we start moving past next year, it gets harder and harder to have any type of projection that works. And it's a requirement for OSPI. But I have, you know, I have very little faith in, you know, 2022, 23, 24, those years when we get out there. So basically we're at 1253, going to 1228. If we use that same projection model, we'd go to about 1209, 1191, and 1174 over that 4-year span. What I do want to point out though is on the bottom in that circled box, you'll see that it says K6 and 712. If you look at 2015-16, we had about 640 students in the K6 band and about 697 in the 712. This year we had 616 in the K6 and 638 in the 712. And next year, I can't see it because the comment popped up, but next year they're just about even at about 613 and 615. So you can kind of see the pattern. And if we move out 4 more years, you're at 609, 566. And it's pretty obvious when you look at it. If we look at 2019 current year, K6, we're at 89, 91, 74, 84, 96, 88, 93. We look at 712, you see the 100, 109, 120, 116, 94, 97. So as those hundreds move out of the system and are being replaced by 70, 80s, and 90s, that's why you see that difference in that 712 becoming smaller over time. So that's one of the realities that, you know, that we're seeing as we move through this enrollment. Next. So this is the previous 5 years and the next 4 projected years. And, you know, the trend line is pretty obvious. You get a little bit of fluctuation in 17, 18, 18, 19 from it. But if you look at 15, 16, 16, 17, 19, 20, they all completely line up. So it's the pattern we're looking at as we move through this current phase of our enrollment. Next. But there is what I consider good news. This is our enrollment history as far back as I could go. And you can see where in the 80s and 90s, we were a growing district. And that's when we built and bought and did all the things that were appropriate at the time. Then we hit 2000 and we started to have a decline, which has been consistent. But the glimmer of hope I see, if you do a trend line from the year 2000 to 2015, 16, and continue that down to today, we would have been at 1,000 students. We're at 1253. So if we borrow a phrase from our governor, we flattened that curve starting in about 2016, and now it's a slower progression of decline. So even though we're still declining, it's not at the same speed that it was. If you go back and look at, there's some really big lines that almost dropped straight down in 2010. So that is a glimmer of hope that it's starting to flatten out and slow down, and that, at some point it will level off. Next. So these are the numbers that I'm suggesting that we use for our funding mechanism. So in basic education, that'd be 1224, another 4.5 in basic education under our ALE program through Spokane schools. That may change depending on what September looks like, but it's that 1228 number. Special education number, I'm pretty confident we'll have 201. That's a population that I think you're going to see stationary. Running Start is basically a pass-through for us. We currently have 29, so I'll budget 29. If we had 100, it wouldn't make any difference because we keep a small indirect percentage for managing it, but most of the money goes to community colleges, so it really doesn't affect us. The vocational program, we're currently about 60. We had 55 last year, so I budgeted in between those two. And our bilingual program is pretty steady with about 10 FTE. So the question I would have for the board before we move on, Christy, is, are you comfortable with those numbers, knowing that, September may be different? This is where I would normally budget based upon what we've seen, but with the unknown that we are seeing potentially in September of what the program looks like. I just want to make sure that, I'm going to build a budget based on this, which you have to accept or reject. So it's kind of a cornerstone on, is it reasonable and is it something that you want?
So, and if I could jump in before you start to discuss that, to Dan's point, right now, under normal circumstances, we'd probably have closer to 70 students in our kindergarten registration. And I believe last I talked to Susie, we're at about 30. And we've got questions coming in about what does next year look like, which are very relevant questions that we'll talk about. The other thing we're hearing, and Dan, I don't know if you have any more information on it, but they're still unclear from the conversations I've had about how we're exactly going to be funded and whether it's going to be based on attendance or enrollment, because it is unclear how we're going to enter September, whether we're face-to-face, whether we're part-time. Any of those things are still being talked about. So I would, as Dan always does, I would ask that we are conservative because it's an unknown. So that's my 2 cents in it. Dan, I don't know if that resonates with what you're thinking or not, but certainly where does the board lie?
So I think that under normal circumstances, those numbers look completely reasonable, but I think that we are probably not in normal circumstances, and I would suggest being more conservative with budgeting, with assumed enrollment, because as you said, kindergarten enrollment at the current point is well down. I would worry if we budget for a normal time period and go into September and it's not a normal time period.
So Dan, can I ask a couple clarifying questions?
Yes.
So my first question would be, if we did budget on the conservative end, would that then impact staffing notifications and/or any teachers or para positions that we would be looking at?
At this point, it would not affect any certificated staff with a contract. It may affect filling unfilled positions at that level. And yes, if we decrease our enrollment, we're decreasing our funding, which means we're going to have to decrease our expenditures because as you'll see, our funding is already going to be below our last year's amount. So the farther down we take enrollment, the more we'll have to decrease our budget expenditures in this process.
And then I had two more questions for you. The second one would be the middle school started a partnership last year with Spokane Online Virtual.
Mm-hmm.
How has that, what does that enrollment look like? And are you seeing more interest in it with the current situation?
We have about 5 FTE in that program currently. And that's at basically at ALE piece, that's about 4.5. I don't have the answer as far as has there been more interest in it.
I can tell you,
me, though.
yeah, I can tell you that, and again, I'm sharing the ideas. These are the discussions. There is nothing set.
Yeah.
We're looking at, can we do it ourselves? Can we partner with Spokane? Are we going to go to a hybrid model on our own? The state is grappling with this very question of what are we going to do and what options will there be and how will they fund it? And we should know more by the 8th of June.
Okay.
But in terms of the budgeting, the issue is this: it's not a normal year. We know that.
Yeah.
Normally by now we will have hired our staff. I've slowed us down. We have vacancies, we have retirements, we have openings, but we are slowing it down because I can't see us committing to people, because once we commit, it's contract. And so there's that. I'll be talking to you more about that piece this evening based on what I know. I'll also be talking to you more about athletics and so on. So I guess the issue that we always have is Dan has to put together a budget and the board has to approve it by mid-July.
Yeah.
And we're not going to know all the factors that play into that.
No, and my intention for asking that question is just to see if, because the likelihood is that parents will either be homeschooling, enrolling in virtual schools, or continuing to attend a district of their choice, hopefully their local district. So my intention with asking that question is to see if there is any indication that they are choosing that option that South Whidbey offers. And then my last question for you, Dan, is when you say that you would like to estimate on the conservative end, what does that mean? Are you planning for a 30% reduction in student enrollment, 20%, 5%? What would conservative mean for you in terms of budgeting?
For me, I have no idea what to expect. And that's why we're having this conversation. In a normal year, I just tell you, this is what I think we're going to do. And we'd go, okay, that's great. And we'd move on. I really don't know what September looks like. I think traditionally for me, these would be conservative numbers because that's the process I always use. I would think that would be fine. I just don't know what September is really going to look like, what type of program we have, how it's going to affect kids. And we don't have to accept, numbers tonight and say, this is, what we're going to use. I'm just trying to get a feeling for where you guys are at. I can revise these, in a couple of weeks, we hear more from the state or whatever. But the bottom line is, until I, have an idea where the revenue is, it's really hard to figure out where our expenditures have to be. And, within the next week, I'll have all salary negotiation plans done and we'll know what employee costs will be for next year as they are today before we change anything. So, I'll have that part done and it'll give me an idea of how far we have to go. But it's just, I really don't have that answer for September. I don't know what conservative is because I don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
So Joe, I would like to my questions were very similar to Andrea's, except for maybe a little bit different in the essence of, so we're looking at trying to find a conservative number, and I appreciate Dan, because I was right there with Andrea. But I'm also trying to figure out, okay, so in this current era, what is our collective bargaining agreements parameters that we have for leniency due to the fact that, let's say that the worst case scenario comes in that, well, maybe it's not the worst case, but I'll just say we have a 50% reduction and now we're overstaffed and we didn't plan for that in the budget. What are we looking at if we were to face something like that? So I think that part,
So
along with the other,
anything dramatic like that,
yeah,
we would have to request impact bargaining. Impact bargaining goes both ways with a unit, right? This is an impact of no control to either party. And so you open discussion around that. Doesn't mean we get anywhere. It means that you'd have to open discussion and talk about the impact. When I talk to other superintendents and our best prognostication, we're talking anywhere between 5 and 20%, which is pretty significant. But again, I would suggest that we wait because we will have better plans by June. We'll know more about what we're doing, whether it's part-time. We'll also know more about funding because the state has a variety of subgroups right now that they're going to come up with a plan, and they've promised to let it out to superintendents by the first week of June. So we'll know more. And then once we know more, and I'll jump into what I was going to update you on. One of the things that we're working with the CEE folks on is a survey for this spring that's all about the what ifs for families to grapple with. Rather than doing the climate survey, we'll do that again in the fall. But to do a survey with them that is based in the research that they've done at CEE, based on what the state comes out with, we talk to families about, if it's this, would you send your kid? Would you send your kid if everybody has to wear a mask? Would you feel comfortable if we're not in phase 4 with your child coming to school? If your child's coming to school in the fall, would you prefer to stay with the teacher they're with now? What would that look like? Those kinds of questions, so that we get a sense from our community and we know more about what they're thinking. Are people willing to go face-to-face school if we come back in the fall? And then we have to think about the expenses that'll go with that. What if we're coming to school half-time? Half the group in the morning, half in the afternoon, so class sizes are 15 and kids see their teacher half the day. What if we had school, 2.5 days a week for one set of kids and 2.5 kids, in the other set of kids? So, those kinds of questions are the questions we need to look at, but quite frankly, it's still too soon, even though the budget process is upon us. And that's the difficulty we face.
So my follow-up question to it was more like this too. So if we face an additional 20% decrease in enrollment, would that put us automatically into impact bargaining upon passing this budget?
Well, any dramatic change can allow us to ask to bargain. It doesn't mean we'll effectively change anything. We can always ask to bargain. They don't have to say yes, any of the groups. So there's no provision in the contract except if a levy fails that requires both parties to come to the table. And we're not facing a levy failure. But again, the state is also working on mitigating factors. They still don't know if it's going to be totally based on enrollment. They don't know, how they're even going to account attendance, right? Because if we're doing part-time, what does that mean? So those questions are bigger than our district.
Any other questions from the board? I'll throw my thought in, Dan. It's short and sweet. Go conservative.
Okay.
Yep. You can always add later if the numbers are higher, but I think you're really wise in being lean.
And we'll be conservative on the expenditure side. I'm going to really be careful in there not to add, costs. So.
Nicely done.
Okay. So based on these numbers, then we can take a look at what our revenue should look like. So Christy, you want to go to the next one? And the next.
That's funny, Dan.
Well, thank you. So you'll see that we get funding from several sources. The large green and purple are state funding, which is referred to as apportionment based on student enrollment. So more kids you have, the more money you get. Fewer kids, less money. The other big blue one is the local tax revenue, which is our property taxes, and it's also tied to our student enrollment. They changed it a few years ago. We used to be able to ask for $4 million and collect $4 million. Now we collect a number based on the number of students we have, which equates to about $3.3 million. So as a result of the McCleary decision, we actually get less local revenue, but more state general purpose. But as we are a district that it continues to get smaller each year, it actually doesn't increase for us. So next. So when I go to figure out how much money we're going to get, there's a lot of calculations, and these are just some of the things that we need. Now, kind of point out the important parts. Of course, there's the enrollment numbers, but there's also factors that are legislative factors, such as salaries, IPD, the implicit price deflator, basically how much they increase the salary allocations by, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, how much we can increase the levy by. But the ones that are kind of important are there's ones in the middle that says regionalization factor at 22%, and we'll talk about that. And then also there's a third professional learning day this year, so we get more funding, but it also requires more expenditure. So it's those type things. And then there's the special education rates, the levy rates, the ALE rates, and all those things. But it's some of the things that I use to calculate this. Next. So to be very simple, the number of students we have times the staffing ratio, which they call the prototypical school model, dictates how much we will receive for salaries, benefits, and supply services and other costs. Just kind of a very simple process. There's a lot of calculations in that, but that's kind of the concept. So the more kids you have, the more money you get. Less kids you have, less money you get. Next. OSPI also classifies employees into 3 categories for their funding purposes. The first is certificated instructional staff. We think of those as teachers, anybody with a certificate. We have classified staff, custodians, maintenance, bus drivers, secretaries, paraeducators, etc. And then we have the certificated administrative staff, which is basically your principal, superintendent, and assistant superintendent. And they fund them at different levels and at different amounts. Next. So an example of the prototypical school model, at an elementary school, if you have 400 students, they will fund you for 1.253 principals, which is certificated administrative staff. For that 400 students, they will also fund a 0.493, or basically a half-time guidance counselor, and a little over 1.5 custodians as classified staff. So you can see that the middle school and the high school have different ratios, different enrollment numbers, but they all work exactly the same. So it's a number of students determined what they refer to as staffing units. Has nothing to do with our actual staffing amounts. We always have more staff than we're allocated through the funding model, especially instructional and classified staff. Next. So hard to see, but this is the OSPI F203 program, which is an online program where I input all that information I showed you, and it starts calculating. And this is what our apportionment report looks like. It's about 80 pages long each month, and does all these calculations to tell you how much money you're getting. So basically the top one says that if we have 614.45 students in grades K6, they're funding it at 1.253 principals per 400 kids. They will fund us for 1.925 principals at the K6 level. So it's just a staffing unit number. Again, nothing to do with how we actually staff. Classroom teachers, you see at grades K3, they take the enrollment, they divide it by 17 and add a 0.155 on there for prep time, and they come up with 23 classroom teachers. That's a little misleading though, because they're not all classroom teachers. They are specialists such as PE teachers, art teachers, music teachers, etc. So your class size is not going to be 17 to 1. So even though it's a 17 to 1 ratio, it isn't a class size ratio. And I think people sometimes get a little confused as, well, K3 should be 17 kids in a classroom. No, it's 17 kids to every staffing unit, but it includes other people and not just the classroom teacher. Next. So once we know how many staffing units in each of those 3 categories they're going to fund us for, then we start looking at how much are they going to fund us. And one of the things that they changed a few years ago, we used to have something called a mix factor, and it was the education and experience of our teaching staff. So somebody with a master's degree, 90 credits, 17 years of experience would be paid basically twice as much as a brand new teacher. So as a district with highly educated and highly experienced teachers, we always received more money, which was a higher mix factor. Well, they took that out and instituted a basic state salary that every district in the state receives the same dollar amount for their certificated instructional staff, same for their classified staff and for their administrators. But then they added in something called regionalization. And we were one of those 6 districts in the state that received a regionalization factor of 24%, which basically means we got 24% more than the state allocation because of the education experience of our teachers. Well, that's great, except that next year that 24% reduces to 22%. So we lose 2% in our funding on those allocation model. And as we looked at the IPD, the amount that they increased salaries for 2021, that was 1.6%. So the reality is we actually lost money in this, and it will continue for the next 2 years as it goes to 20% and then 18% over time. So it's one of those things where it has going to keep us very flat in our revenue for the next 3 years, because our regionalization decrease will be larger than our implicit price deflator increase, or the cost of living increase. Next. So if we look at our funding allocation on the far left, certificated instructional staff, the state allocation is $67,585. Because we have a very experienced staff who is more than 50% above the state average, we get additional 4%, so that's 2,703, and then the regionalization of 14,869. So our funding for every certificated instructional staff that we receive is $85,157. Again, it's not for every staff we have, but it's for those that are funded based on the number of students we have. Same thing with classified with the regionalization, we're at $59,149. The one thing that's a little misleading about classified, and I know the Seattle Times did an article on this about a year ago, is that most classified staff, other than maintenance, custodials, and some of the district office staff, not all of them, don't work a full 1.0, 2,080 hours a year. If you think of somebody that's working a school term at 180 days, 6 hours a day, you know, they might be working 11, 12, 1,300 hours. So, you know, they're not going to be making $59,000, but we get funded based upon that funding for a 1.0. So it's a little misleading, because I know that people sometimes say, well, geez, I don't make that as a classified person. And some people make more. And then the certificate administrative staff, with regionalization, we receive funding of $122,392. So they calculate how many staffing units we should receive based on enrollment, multiply it by this dollar amount to come up with a funding level. And when we talk about these, this is just a funding allocation model. It's nothing else. Next. And again, we go back to the F203. That's exactly what it does. It says that we should have, based on our student enrollment, 63.242 certificated teachers, K-12. They multiply it by that salary amount and use the, they do a little odd. Rather than doing one calculation, they break it down into two. So the first one is actually using last year's numbers, and then they do a second calculation, increases it by percentage for this year, and then subtracts and add them together to come up with a total. But all it really does, it says we have 63.242 staffing units that are funded at roughly 67,585, which is the state allocation. And then we're going to add the 22% to 4% to come up with the total that we're funded for certificated staff. Does that for classified, does that for administrative staff. Breaks down by schools and then breaks it down by district. So in different categories, and then totals that dollar amount for the funding allocation. Next. Once we know how many staffing units and how much they're paying us for the staffing units, they then calculate the benefits. And benefits are going to be FICA, Medicare, retirement. It's percentages times those, and also healthcare. So it's roughly $1,000 per funded unit per month, which is our SEB insurance and all things that go in that. So they then create the benefits, add that to the salary, and then they add on the MSOCs, which is the next screen. Next. And MSOCs are based on students also. Basically, we get $1,313.85 per student that we have in the district. And then if in the CTE program, it's $1,554. And this pays for all those things that are not staffing related. You know, technology, utilities, insurance, curriculum, textbook, library, et cetera, et cetera. What I want to point out on this is we look at the bottom part, that's the total amount we get as a district. So if we look at utilities and insurance, which is the second line on the bottom, we get about $436,000 from basic education, about $25,000 from CTE. So we're roughly getting $460,000 for utilities and insurance. Our utilities run about that amount, and our insurance runs $240,000. So you can see that we're totally underfunded in a lot of these categories. So not only do we pay more for staffing than we receive, because they don't fund everybody, they also underfund us in the MSOC. So you'll see as we talk about levies, how we use our money. This is one of the areas that's real easy to identify that there's not enough funding there. Next. And then the F203 summarizes those 87 pages and gives me a page that says, okay, for apportionment next year, you should get, based on these numbers, you know, 12,343,000, 482,000 for special education, 1.85 million for special education, LAP, et cetera. And it gives me the numbers that we actually put into our budget process. This has to be done with the state prior to actually creating the budget documents. They don't allow you to open your budget document until you actually have done this and had it checked by the ESD. Next. So comparison to the last couple of years, and you'll see that the apportionment's, you know, fairly similar. So even though regionalization is going down, IPD goes up a little bit, it's about the same. Special education is about the same. The 0 to 2 special education that you see that there's no funding this year, that's a change at the state level. That funding always came through OSPI, and then we would actually pass it through to the Tyler Learning Center, who would actually provide program. This year, it no longer goes through OSPI. It goes through a different state agency, so we no longer fund or have anything to do really with that 0 to 2 program in special education. The LAP is based on last year's enrollment numbers. So it's just a calculation based on enrollment and based on your free and reduced population percentage. So it has some variables in there that changes from year to year based on those two particular variables. National Board Bonus is just a pass-through to teachers that have qualified for that. The Homeless Stability Support is a grant, and most grants, if we have a revenue, we have a matching expenditure, but if we don't get the revenue, we don't have the expenditure. And then there's bilingual program, highly capable program. There's a small stipend we get from the state as a copay for food service. The big one I want to talk about though is the state transportation. This is the reimbursement for the operations of the school buses, not for the purchase, but for actually picking up kids and taking them to and from school. And you'll see that there's a dramatic change between this year and next year. And that's basically a result of the state allocating fewer dollars to transportation. If you look at 18-19, $1.1 million, we got a bonus that year from the state. They gave us extra money. It was a miscalculation at the state level. So they have to pay the $29.6 million back out of the 2021 budget, which basically means that they had to reduce the allocations in 2021 by that dollar amount. So, you know, it's a reduction that we hadn't planned on, but it doesn't change the ridership or any of the other factors we have going on. It just, they have less money, and so they are reducing them out to districts. And for us, that was the reduction that we're looking at, fairly substantial. Next. So one thing I do want to make sure you understand, when we create these budgets, OSBI starts paying us in September based on our estimates, and they pay us September through December based on those numbers that we give them. In January, they start calculating what the actual enrollment numbers were reported in September, October, November, and December, and they recalculate that amount. So the amount that they owe us could go up if we have more kids than we budgeted, or it could go down if we have fewer kids than we budgeted. And they continue to do that through June, and it's actually June when we know how much our annual apportionment report really generated for us, because that's when they have the final adjustment to it. So kind of the importance of making sure we get a estimate that's realistic is that if you budget too high on your enrollment and you hit January and all of a sudden they take a bunch of money away from you, it becomes much harder than if they, you know, adjust you up a few kids or something. So just something to be aware of, that the estimates aren't a guarantee of revenue for us. They are just a funding mechanism for 4 months. Next. So local levy, you can see that the voters passed about $4 million in both of those years, but we are limited in our district to $2,627 per student FTE, which comes to about 3.3 million. So that's all we can actually collect. So we will roll back or not collect from our taxpayers next year, $667,622. Levies are a calendar year collection. We work on a fiscal year, so we collect part of a levy in the fall and the remainder of the next year levy in the spring. So there's a variation on how that is collected. Next. So what do we use? Okay, just kind of a picture of what it is. So basically, if we go back to 17-18, we were collecting 4 million, and then they started to kick in that per student amount in 18-19. So half of that year we could collect the full 2 million, the other half we couldn't. Last year we collected it based on the student amount and again on the student amount. So it's about the same as it was last year because we've been on that student ratio for the last 2 years. But again, it's substantially less than the $4 million that the community, voted for. Next. So what do we use these for? It's a variety of things. Basically anything that's not funded through basic education or OSBI. So they don't fund any of our athletics, travel costs with athletics, staff that's not funded or underfunded. You looked at how much they funded for staff and how much we pay, you'll see there's a difference. Also the fact that they don't fund every staff member we have, they fund a percentage. We talk about utilities insurance where we get $460,000 and we actually spend $740,000. So that comes out of the local levy. Food service, and next year because of the lower transportation allocation, we'll have to fund those to the levy. And then anything that we negotiated as a district, whether it's healthcare, VIBA, any type of paid leave, vacation pay, tri-pay, additional time, and any professional development above those 3 days that's funded by the state. And again, the state doesn't fund it for everybody. They fund it for basic education, special education, and lab, not all programs. So if you're working under a federal program, they don't fund that for us. So those are where we use the bulk of our enrichment levy funds for additional things. Next. We also get our federal special purpose, and most of this is special education and title funds. These are estimates at this time because they normally don't come out till later in June. But other than the Title I, they're probably gonna be fairly similar. Last year, Title I had a carryover, so we got an extra bump in it in last year's budget. It also is compared to budget. If you look at IDA, the top one, the 349, they actually reduced that a few months ago. So we're not really going to get as much as originally we had budgeted based upon what they told us last year. So it's those federal dollars. The other one is the federal school lunch. That's the reimbursement piece for free and reduced. And question is, you know, what are we operating in September? And going to a webinar tomorrow with Chartwells, who is going to give us all kinds of ideas about how do we provide food service in this new world that we may have when we hit September. So, you know, backing that off a little bit, just not knowing what that's going to be. But it's fairly similar to where we are this year. The bottom one, commodities, is the products we get from the federal government, and it doesn't really matter what number we put in there because it's a revenue and an expenditure. It offsets each other. So I just put a placeholder in there, but it's usually in the $20,000 range. Next. So we also have local non-tax, and this is things that are generated in the district, donations, Southwoody School Foundation, PTSA, etc., rental fees, predominantly at the community center, though we do have rental fees in the other buildings. Our local food service, anybody that pays for, child that pays for their meal goes through this. Student fees, our driver's training program, sell or resell the goods. If you're in a shop program, we buy the wood and you reimburse us for it, and investment earnings. So it's the interest we receive on the money that we have in the bank that we're not using on a monthly basis. Next. So there's a few that, you know, I'm going to mention. One is investment earnings. The fact that interest rates have dropped to basically nothing. I'm anticipating that we're not getting much of a return. You know, this happened a few years ago and it was very, very slight. The other one is the rentals community center. We had budgeted $310,000 for the current year. If we are not completely open and operational in September, or if we have people that don't return in September because they weren't able to carry themselves during this time, there's a good possibility that we may not collect as much rent. So here's one of the areas I want to be conservative in that, thinking that there's a good possibility that we might not have a full building come September. And I don't know how long that may take to get people back in the building if we need to. Next. So summary, we have the different categories. You'll see bottom line, currently our budget's $21 million. And next year, based on those enrollment numbers, we're about $20,500,000. So it's about $500,000 less in revenue projected next year than there has been for the last 2 years. Less in rental income, decline in enrollment, and a reduction in the regionalization are the three major factors that cause that. And we'll see a very similar pattern for the next couple of years, predominantly because of that regionalization piece where we continue to have, you know, fewer dollars allocated because they are reducing that over time. Next. I guess that was it.
Dan, I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, really quick, I was looking at that community center revenue. Last year it was 370, and this year it's down to 310. Is that specifically right now based on COVID, or is there something else that we've done differently there?
Yeah, there is something different. The first year, that included revenue for all rentals and not just the community center.
Okay, just still was reading as community centers for 2018-19. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't separate it in the prior years. We just took all rentals and put them in the same category. But for
Okay.
now, I'm trying to break apart, what's school rentals versus what is community center rental versus, other things like that.
And you're still estimating a budget reduction of about 40% or up to 60% now with the community center due to COVID?
Right now, I'm budgeting about a 35% reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Any other
Yeah.
questions from the board? Sobering news, but we know you're in good hands. We're in good hands with you, so thank you.
Yeah, it's not really unexpected.
No,
So
actually not.
we've known this for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay, I'm waiting for that agenda to come up, Christy, and she's right on it, as always. Okay, so we're on, I think we're on board comments.
Should be superintendent update, no?
That's what I thought. There we go. Yep,
Superintendent update?
that's you.
That's me. So I wanted to get to update you on a variety of things, and then I'll look at the questions and we can tackle those. Had a question from a board member regarding athletics for the fall. We did get some follow-up. Superintendents, athletic directors, and WIAA met via Zoom yesterday and talked about what's going to potentially happen. The issue we're in right now is everything's ambiguous. So take it with a grain of salt because it could change tomorrow. But this is what I know at this time. WIAA and put together guidance that they'd like approved by the Department of Health in response to what came out from the National Federation of High Schools. So the National Federation put out guidance. WIAA put together a potential plan, sent it off to the Department of Health. In this conversation yesterday, we found out we might get that back in the next week or two, but it's yet to be determined because, as he said, the Department of Health's a little busy these days. But the basic thing that he said yesterday is that they're going to give us guidance, and then we're going to have to decide what's feasible and what isn't, based on cleaning and social distancing and so on. However, they are looking seriously at options for the fall potentially being changed. For example, it's unlikely that football will be a fall sport. It may be a spring sport this next year, but that's going to require other districts to change that, WIAA to change that. Otherwise, the competitiveness, the competitors would be different, right? So that's a piece of it is flipping football. They're looking at the fall sports being those limited contact sports. They mentioned a variety of things. Nothing has been determined, but could you play baseball in the fall because it's less contact? Could you play, track could go on, or cross country, so on. It's really all up in the air at this point. They could also shorten any season. The Department of Health is kind of projecting this bump up in COVID again after Thanksgiving. I know that some colleges, for example, are doing their fall semester and stopping at the Thanksgiving break for the rest of the fall. Things like that are being talked about. They also were saying that there won't be athletic hardship waivers on the whole due to COVID itself. Kids may experience a particular hardship, family lost a job, student or family member was ill, something like that on an individual basis, but it won't be in general that students remain eligible. That eligibility issue remains the same. They have, the certain number of years from 7th grade on. Let's see, just looking at my notes here. In terms of whether or not anything will happen over the summer, again, yet to be determined. Under normal circumstances, once the spring sports season officially ends, then athletes and coaches can work together. This year, that may or may not be the case. So bottom line is we're once again waiting to find out what they come up with for plans, because this again would be a statewide competition issue. So we're gonna wait and see. And then there may be decisions about, you know, how much more equipment would we have to purchase if it's this, that, or the other thing? And if that's the case, how are we gonna do that, or what are we gonna do? So I didn't wanna leave you waiting, but I don't really have any greater depth answers than that. Charlie and Damien, I know you're much more connected. I don't know if you have more input from WIAA than that, but Paul's been staying in touch with them, so.
I appreciate the update. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the update. I mean, really the other schools too in the new league, right, are gonna kind of dictate what we do. So I think it's gonna be a collective effort.
It is. And here's the interesting thing about where we are right now, which, you know, we're in the Emerald City League. Our football remains pretty similar to what it is this year. Snohomish, Pierce, and King County are still in phase 1. They don't know, based on conversation with them and their health department, they don't know when and they might move to phase 2, which impacts a whole host of things, including their plans for graduation. But if that's the league we're in, that's going to also be part of whether or not we have teams to compete against, even if we're allowed to field a team. So that's that piece for athletics. For the other piece of this is, what are we going to do? This is the big nut to crack. What are we going to do for instruction? And as I mentioned earlier, we're waiting again for state guidance. Once we get that state guidance, then we're going to reach out to our community with a survey to see what folks are thinking about. The very difficult issue we have, and someone mentioned it in the chat, is right now, teachers had a relationship with students. So when this closure happened, kids knew their teachers and were able to maintain a relationship, and you know what happens. So in the fall, I know what is being looked at is some kind of a model where, can we come in part-time? As I said earlier, can we do something that allows a relationship to develop and still have some online learning happening, hybrid learning of some sort? So no decisions yet, just a lot of discussion about it. We also certainly, you know, we have kids who really need to be in school, families who are really tired of having to be mom and dad and childcare and instruction. So we're listening. It's just that we don't have the opportunities to open. So it's going to be different. In terms of questions, somebody asked how many participants are in the meeting. That's an easy one. We have 19 participants and 10 panelists, but I count as 2 panelists, so we really have 9 panelists. So that answers that question. I know graduation's a big question. Let me look at this one. Is there any more discussion on the future of instruction, what it looks like for the fall, what the options are, planning and discussion, and it's vital to have public input? Absolutely. And we have no more at this point than what I've said. And when we do know more, we will be getting some public input. And Dan, I'm not sure if you have an answer to this one or if it will take some time to look at it. Has this COVID event cost us more money or less? For example, has this savings in transportation, but cost for supplying families with needed items to provide instruction at home? I don't know if you have an answer.
I don't have an exact answer. I do know we haven't saved in transportation. We're still providing meals. So our bus drivers are still out on the road, you know, driving on a daily basis. We're saving a little bit on fuel, but we are buying more cleaning equipment, more PPEs, you know, all those type things. Probably have a better answer in a couple of months. I also don't know, you know, I know we've done some online things that we hadn't had in the past. So I haven't totaled those up yet to see what those costs are going to be, but I know there are some programs going into the fall that we will be using that we wouldn't have used otherwise. So I don't have an exact answer, but I don't think those things are going to be the big savings. The savings I see probably are just the sub costs.
Okay, thank you. Comment here, let's see. It says, according to OSPI, it sounds like we will likely be going to a hybrid in-school and online program. Some of the parents that are the biggest public school advocates I know are considering going unenrolling and doing a different online program if that's the case. There will be no bond with a new teacher and the parent would not be getting the benefit of kids being socialized anymore. What are your thoughts and plans for this, and when do you need enrollment numbers for funding? Well, we've talked about the enrollment numbers for funding because even if we budget a certain number, our enrollment will get we'll get money based on that for the fall, and then once we have the actuals, they'll either take away or add to our funding. So the numbers, it's not a particular point in time, it's over time. Yeah, it's a difficult issue with not having kids in school, as we talked about. So we're going to do the best we can to create a program that meets needs. There's a comment here, there are only 25 confirmed COVID cases in our district. I'm not sure what the number is in our district in particular. Overall on the island, there were 180 cases, 10 deaths. And the good news is all of the testing they did over the last week or 10 days, there wasn't a single positive so far. So yeah, in my conversation with the health department this morning, that doesn't, they're cautiously optimistic. They want everybody to continue social distancing. We are in phase 2, but with no camping. And their biggest concern, which for those of us who are residents here may likely be our biggest concern, there's 2-hour waits coming over from Mukilteo on the weekend. So it's not about the residents of the island. We are a tourist enterprise. So that's the real concern from the health department's perspective is, can we maintain this as we get into the warmer summer months? They talked about, local businesses voluntarily, not taking appointments, for example, for haircuts from other than residents and so on, because those counties across the way are in phase 1 and things are still pretty restricted. So that's a worry. I shared the attendance. Yeah, and the concern about students who have special needs and how we're going to meet those special needs if we're not back in school and doing face-to-face support. So yeah, that's a pretty significant issue that we're grappling with. I want to take care of all the other questions before we talk about graduation. Let's see. I think I've taken care of them. So graduation, we met with the graduation committee as I updated the community. And I'm going to, Christy, I need to take over the screen share. If you can drop yours. I'm going to show you the guidance that we received from the Department of Health, which speaks to why we're doing what we're doing for, sorry, let me do the screen share first. Okay, so what we're doing is basically drive-in, safe start, phase 2 only. So had a lot of questions about, how many cars and can we have more than one car, and what about a split family, and what about large families? So we are doing number 6 here. Only students and their immediate family members who are staying at home together and who are not sick may arrive in the same vehicle. We're limiting this to 1 vehicle per student. All persons attending the ceremony must drive up in an enclosed vehicle, remain in the vehicle during the entire ceremony. Individuals should not get out of their vehicle during the ceremony for any reason. We are hybriding this and we're pushing the envelope as it is because we want the 1 student to be able to get out of the car to be able to be on the stage. But it's really a moving situation. So car will pull in, we're going to stage everybody, and I'm not going to get deep into the logistics because we're going to send them out in detail from John Patton, who is still working on all of that. But it will be part of the parade, and that's essentially based on the guidance that we have here. That's what we're doing. And we only are able to do that because we are in phase 2. So I know that that's frustrating for folks. I'm sorry about that, but we're maintaining safety first and we're following the guidance. Some folks have asked about the logistics of the parade and how we're going to keep it moving and so on and so forth. That we're working out. This actually will be a very nice ceremony. There will be stations set up for kids, but that is all forthcoming in the details from John Patton. I know that I've gotten some suggestions from people, and we've passed that from the committee still. This is where we are. So I wanted to update the board on that.
Can I ask you a question?
You bet.
Okay, so I saw in there that the one car, and I'm just curious with families that have 2-parent households, what was the reasoning for, or why can't we have 2 cars? Why is it just one? Why can't
One
another-
car on campus that the student gets out of. We can have all the cars we want in the parade, and people can set up for the parade, but they're not going to be coming through the campus. The only person coming through the campus and getting out of the car is the student in their cap and gown.
Oh, no, I understood that part. That was great. I was just wondering why, like if I had a stepchild or something or whatever from a 2-family household, why couldn't I be in the car behind and just at least still be able to watch?
They
That was
can
my
watch
question.
from the, well, essentially, Damien, we're already going beyond the limits. We're not even supposed to have the student get out of the car. We're letting the student get out of the car for pictures. What we had originally planned was that the student would get a video taken, and that video would be put into a graduation video, and the parade would be the only sort of on-site. We've modified that because a lot of people had concerns that they wanted to at least see their student in a cap and gown. There's not going to be any distribution of diploma or anything. So really, this is to capture that picture. This is not a graduation ceremony. It's not all of what happens at a normal graduation. It's to get the picture in front of the stage for the students so that we can put that into a video keepsake after we capture it all. The original plan was to capture it all second week of May. And that was misunderstood as the graduation ceremony, which it wasn't. It was just supposed to be capturing the video. So really what we're trying to do is capture photo and video, because logistically, we're not going to have more than 1 car per student. All those folks who want to hook up with their student, they can be in the parade. They can see it because we're trying to work out live streaming, but it's 1 car per student. That's the logistics that we have. We have 120 graduates, and we're trying to stage that. So.
But just correct me if I'm wrong here. You were saying that the 1 car that's allowed, those people all have to be living together. How are you going to monitor that they're not? So if they are from a 2-person family or a 2-household family.
I'm not going to monitor who's in the car. I'm trusting people to respect the fact that we're in a pandemic. And over 100,000 people have died in this country. And this is the rule, the set of rules that we're living under. This is what we were given by the Department of Health and what we're following. That's why we're doing it. It says it very clearly in the guidance that it should be members of the same household. If people don't follow that, I'm not going to get in their car, but we are going to make sure that the person in the car includes the graduate in cap and gown. Any other questions?
Okay, board comments.
I would share that after that last meeting, the parents did reach out to me for the looking at their graduation contract. Long story short, without getting into details, reference to Black's Legal Dictionary, which states that an act of God is something that's not man-made, and kind of referred them to the fact that the governor has ordered a shutdown. That might be a conversation to have with those people that they worked that out with. I think they did, and that they understood the negotiations behind it between they have done some work, and also that, of course, if you get attorneys involved, they're going to take a third plus their fees. So I think that that's been worked out. I think the parents are, for the most part, getting or the students, a good portion of their deposits back. I think that they did some really good negotiating there from what I'm getting the feedback on. And so I just wanted to give you an update that it may not be 100%, but it's a lot better than what it was originally.
Thanks, Damien. Anyone else, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that slipped by in the consent agenda, but I wanted to take a moment to recognize the outstanding career of Rachel Kaiser.
Oh, yeah.
She was my 6th grade homeroom teacher and is retiring this year, and has been for years an inspiration to students and fellow educators alike. Not only was she exceptional at engaging her students in their lessons, but throughout her long career, she continued to work on professional development and to hone her craft to keep up with the latest pedagogy. She actually served as an advisor for my wife, Katya, when she was working on student teaching, helping her learn what it's like to teach in a small school district like South Whidbey or Coopville, where Katya ended up. Rachel's been a strong believer in SWIA, always working to support the rights and responsibilities of her fellow teachers, providing leadership and serving as a positive example to those around her. I just wanted to say that Rachel's passion, experience, and knowledge will be missed, and I want to wish her the best as she leaves the classroom and enjoys the beginnings of a well-earned retirement.
Nicely said, Brooke.
I think that was wonderful, Brooke. Rachel Kaiser is certainly an amazing human being and an amazing teacher, and she's going to be very, very missed in the district. Generations of kids have gone through her classroom and benefited, and wow, what a legacy to leave. So Rachel, I hope you're listening. I don't think you are though, but maybe someone will tell you. I have one comment. I think that I want to do a shout out to John Levasseur and Farmer Carrie Peterson. I had a chance to look at those YouTube videos about 5 fun things at the farm, and that was fabulous. I mean, what a great way to engage kids. I even went out last night in the dark and looked for slugs the way Carrie suggested that you get rid of them, and it worked. So great way to keep people and keep our youngsters involved in that fabulous farm program. It was very well done. Any other comments? Well, with that, we will adjourn the meeting, and I wish everybody continued good health and stay safe, everybody. Thank you for being in attendance.
Can you just hang on one sec before you go?
Yeah.
So it looks like the June meeting will remain virtual for the board. We're going to see what July brings, because we definitely, I mean, we can do it this way, but there definitely needs to be a budget session separate from the board meeting to approve the budget. So there will be a budget session on July 10th. There will be a budget session. But we won't have another meeting now until June. What's the date, Christy? June 24th? I'm sorry, I'm going off memory. June 24th is the next meeting. And then there'll be a budget session on July 10th. And then the next
July
meeting,
8th.
July 8th,
July 8th.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
July 8th. And then the board meeting in July at the end of the month. So.
I think it would be beneficial if we can arrange it to get a workshop, virtual or otherwise, around the budget, because I think it would be helpful for the community to know exactly what's going into that and how we're approaching it, if that's possible.
That's the July 8th date that we just talked about. Yep. That'll be the only topic will be budget.
Thank you.
And then you won't vote on it for another 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.